While Australia may have been late to the game when it comes to the amusement park industry, circuses and performing acts inspired by those from overseas were abundant throughout the country during the early 20th century. One of the fathers of the Australian circus was Alfred Percival Bullen. Born in Kiama in 1896, Bullen's family were originally from New Zealand. He showed a knack for show business from a very early age, starting his first business with a performing pony and a sheep as a small travelling show. In 1917, Bullen married a dancer named Lillian Ethel Crone, keeping the performance business in the family. Lillian, Alfred, and his brother started a travelling circus carnival, beginning with a small merry-go-round and slowly expanding their offerings. By 1922, the carnival had earned them enough money to officially establish Bullen's Circus, which would go on to be the biggest, most successful, and longest-running circus in Australian history. Their acts would include Lillian herself dancing in a troupe of 4 dancers known as the 4 Marzellas, and various other acts of acrobatics, music, and theatre. During the Second World War, the circus became stranded at Yeppoon, when petrol shortages meant they were unable to move on with their tour. In the end, this was a huge blessing. There was an American airbase nearby to Yeppoon, and the Bullens had the foresight to replace their male performers who had been drafted into the war with more performing girls. This made the act very popular with the American troops, and Bullen's circus became a huge success. But after the war efforts ended, the focus of the circus switched again, as peacetime meant that touring could resume and the target audience became more diverse. And this time, the focus switched from girls to exotic animals. Lillian and Alfred had 3 sons, Stafford, Kenneth, and Gregory, and all 3 were raised in close proximity to any exotic animal that one could think of. Both Stafford and Kenneth showed great interest in entering the circus industry, and so it should have come as no surprise that Bullen's circus would pass into the hands of the 2 brothers when Lillian passed away after a battle with cancer in 1965. However, the circus that Stafford and Kenneth inherited was not the booming success that it had been during the Second World War and the years that followed. Attendances were struggling, and the business was not raking in the cash like it used to. Stafford blamed this problem on the advent of television. He saw TV as a threat to his business, as families could now just as easily entertain themselves from the comfort of their own home, essentially for free, rather than going out and spending money at his circus. Stafford knew that the travelling circus would not be sustainable, and wanted to come up with something fresh, new, and exciting to draw crowds back in, and it wouldn't take him very long to come up with an idea. In 1968, the first of the Bullen's African lion safari parks opened on land close to Warragamba Dam near Sydney. The Bullens would house some of their large collection of exotic circus animals, most notably lions and tigers, in an open-range zoo enclosure with a drive-through road. This would be the park's signature attraction. Guests would pay to drive their cars through the exhibit, where the only thing separating them from African lions and other big cats was their car window. The park would also feature exhibits of bears, various species of primate, elephants, giraffes, and many more. The lion safari was an immediate success. What made it particularly popular, yet also notorious, was the closeness of the interactions between visitors and the lions. According to former keepers at the park, lions would frequently damage and pull off pieces from guests' cars, including side mirrors and windscreen wipers. Guests would also sometimes have to be rescued by keepers when lions would puncture their tires in the middle of the exhibit. The park made this sense of danger and closeness part of their identity. It was ingrained into the park's sense of humour, from their famous TV jingle, "It's scary but nobody cares," to signs posted at the entrance of the park stating that Poms on push bikes get free entry. The park would attract up to 200,000 visitors every year, and Bullen quickly realised that he was onto a winning concept. The success of the park allowed Stafford Bullen to completely close down the travelling circus business a year later in 1969, relocating the performers and circus animals to a second permanent park in Wallachia, known as Bullen's Animal World. As well as further zoo exhibits, Animal World would largely be the permanent home to the Bullen circus performance. But the growth and success would be far from over. Through the early 1970s, the Bullen family would go on to open 7 African lion safari parks throughout Australia and New Zealand. Largely, the parks would follow the same model as the original park, with the main attraction being the drive-through lion safari. A park opened at Wanneroo near Perth in 1971, followed by parks in Yatala near Brisbane, and parks in Melbourne and Auckland. By 1977, Stafford Bullen estimated that he was the owner of around 360 lions, which he was actively breeding not only for his parks around Australia and New Zealand, but for circuses and zoos right around the world. His business became so successful that for a brief period, the Bullen family were among the richest in Australia, even attempting to buy into casinos in the UK, as well as Channel 9 and Channel 10. In the mid-1980s, Stafford Bullen moved to the Isle of Man and spent a number of years travelling Europe and collecting animals to stock a new zoo project in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. Meanwhile, the lion safari parks remained as popular as ever. A few of my channel viewers reflected on their experiences at the parks. User TyBear2007 said, "I remember going to the Queensland park as a small child. The most memorable part for me was driving through the park in the old family station wagon and being able to feed the emus through the car window. As a small child, those giant birds sticking their heads through the window were terrifying, far more scary than the lions that just laid about doing nothing." User Gemfire855 said, "I would have been very young, 5 to 6 years old, when our family went to the one in Perth. Don't remember much about the lions at all, but I remember my uncle tried to feed a camel and it kind of swallowed his arm, and when he pulled it back out it was covered in camel drool and ick. It may just be that the camel drooled on him, but for some reason the memory is that it swallowed his arm." However, while the parks remained popular for quite some time, the issues with such a large collection of animals being in captivity under the ownership of a former circus operator would quickly become the park's downfall. From being perhaps Australia's largest ever franchise of amusement parks, Bullen's African Lion Safari would meet a very quick fall from grace. Bullen had long been a target of animal liberation protests. He had staunchly defended his record and claimed that his breeding programs were of great importance to animal preservation. However, even by Bullen's own admission, he had an animal cruelty conviction to his name. He had previously been charged with animal cruelty over the treatment of a monkey who had been left on a chain for so long that it had become embedded into the flesh of its neck. The parks had also gained a lot of notoriety and media attention over incidents of injuries and animal escapes. In 1971, a man at the Perth park had his arm clawed by a lion who had managed to push down his car window, and that man later died in hospital following complications involving anesthetic. A second death occurred at the Perth park in 1982, an apparent suicide where a man deliberately exited his vehicle. There were also several incidents of maulings of keepers at several of the parks. More concerning were the escapes. In 1977, lions escaped their enclosure at the Perth park, killing and injuring several other animals within the park. In the mid-1980s, police also investigated reports of a lioness escaping the park grounds completely. Former employees also recounted their troubling experiences. Some employees claimed that part of their duties involved pulling lions by the tail to distract them from the cars of guests who needed assistance. One user on the forum zoochat.com said that on their first day working at the Yatala Park as a 15-year-old, they were required to saddle an Indian elephant for guest rides, and that the elephant was often unhappy to be saddled and would hit keepers with her trunk and chase keepers and guests. For a long time, the stories of injuries, deaths, close calls, and animal escapes became part of the Lion Safari's mystique and folklore. These parks had always been advertised as a brush with danger, and as with any attraction that prides itself on that adrenaline rush, this only added to thrill seekers' excitement. Many stories circulated, and it's hard to distinguish which of them actually occurred and which were tales made up by excited teenagers. It seemed that, despite their track record, the African Lion Safari parks could do no wrong in the eyes of the Australian public. While unfortunate and tragic, any incidents involving the animals only added to the park's notoriety. That was until 1981. Before we start discussing what happened to the African Lion Safari Park, I'd like to give a big thank you to these channel members who make all of this content possible. For less than $2 a month, you can help the channel out and get access to every video as soon as it's uploaded, plus weekly exclusive content and a members-only Discord channel. Click the join button down below, and a big thank you to my members. In 1981, American actress Tippi Hedren, famous for her Golden Globe-winning appearance in Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds, visited the African Lion Safari Park in Wanneroo. Hedren was a staunch animal rights activist, and after her visit she publicly voiced her dismay at the treatment of the lions at the park. This terrible publicity led directly to an investigation into the Bullen parks by the RSPCA. While the specifics of the mistreatment allegations are not public record, there are a few concerning facts regarding the way the lions were kept. As well as the history of maulings and escapes, the parks often had to reach out to local farmers for deceased cows and horses to supplement the huge amount of meat required to feed their big cats on a daily basis. As the parks scrambled to meet the demands of the investigations into their treatment of the animals, and their public liability insurance costs skyrocketed, the tragic demise of the parks would begin to come about. Perhaps the most devastating and high profile of those closures was the Perth Park. Not only did that park close in 1988, but the park was unable to find anywhere for the lions to be transferred or released. Perth's isolation from the other Bullen parks on the east coast of Australia meant it was too risky and too costly to transfer them within the franchise, and there were no other nearby zoos or facilities willing to take them. In the end, every single lion formerly housed at the Wanneroo Park was euthanized. The African lion safari parks would close within quick succession over the course of the late 1980s, with the last of the parks, Warragamba, closing in 1991. The Bullen family relocated their collection of animals to Animal World at Wallachia, which had been closed to the public since 1985, and was turned into a private menagerie to care for the remaining animals. The Bullen's lions went into seclusion and became only a matter of local legend. And that local legend quickly gained even more notoriety than ever before. On August 7th, 1995, the most serious animal escape in the Bullen's troubled history would occur. Allegedly, a group of teenage boys had been exploring the area around the Wallachia menagerie the night before, perhaps trying to get a peek at the exotic animals that were housed in their local neighborhood. They ended up kicking through a stormwater grate to try to gain access to a part of the park, being none the wiser to what they were unleashing. On the night of August 7th, a lioness found her way out of the park through the dislodged stormwater drain and escaped into the nearby townships of Warragamba and Silverdale. It roamed the streets, terrifying locals and killing a dog. Thankfully, the terrifying incident was ended with no further damage or loss of life, but unfortunately, it ended with the lioness being shot by a park employee who was called urgently to the scene. Supposedly, a bear and several water buffalo also escaped, with the bear also being shot and the water buffalo escaping into nearby bushland. After this incident, the remainder of Stafford Bullen's life and the lives of his collection of animals would be far more private. The park were required to upgrade their facilities to protect the local community. Bullen would take a few more tours with circuses until his passing in 2001. His funeral was a genuine celebration of his life. Although with the benefit of hindsight we can strongly disagree with his practices and the treatment of his animals, there is no denying that his business was a product of its time and that his ingenuity in adapting his family business for a new generation resulted in memories for thousands of people over the course of 2 decades. Today, open-range zoos face much stronger legislation than ever before in terms of animal treatment and their purpose in breeding, education, and research. While the majority of operating circuses in Australia today have discontinued the use of exotic animals in their performances, however, there are no federal or state laws banning the use of wild animals in circuses. The Bullen family worked with a charity known as Life on the Line Rescue to safely house the remaining animals at Wallachia. Today, the property is under the management of the Zambi Wildlife Retreat, a charity focused on rehoming and rehabilitating former circus and display animals. The Zambi Wildlife Retreat is open for tours by appointment and is focused on creating a safe and enriching home for the animals who sadly cannot be released into the wild due to the effects of their years of captivity in circuses. Today, other than the Wallachia Park, there are very few remnants of the African lion safari parks. The park at Warragamba was abandoned for many years but has now been demolished for a housing estate, while the park in Yatala is an industrial estate with references to the park in the nearby street names. I was unable to find any information about the exact locations of the other parks or if there are any remnants today, so if you have any memories or information about the other Bullen's parks, please do let me know in the comments below. I'd also love to hear your memories if you ever visited any of these parks. What do you remember of your visits to Bullen's African Lion Safari? Let me know in the comments down below. I'd also really appreciate it if you could click the like button, which helps the video to be promoted by the YouTube algorithm, and click the subscribe button if you're new to the channel so that you don't miss any more Australian theme park history content. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.